My name is Marcus, and I'm 62 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened just 6 months ago, and it changed everything about how I see the world and how the world sees me. I never thought I'd be sharing this story, but after what happened, I feel like I need to. Maybe it'll help someone else who's going through what I went through. I was broke. Not just regular broke, but the kind of broke where you count every penny, where you walk everywhere because you can't afford gas, where you eat rice and beans for weeks because that's all you can manage. After 35 years working at the auto plant, they laid me off 2 years ago, said they were restructuring. What they really meant was they were getting rid of the older guys like me to save money on benefits and pensions. My wife, Sarah, had passed 3 years before that, and between her medical bills and the funeral costs, I'd already spent most of our savings. The unemployment ran out after a year, and my Social Security wasn't enough to cover the mortgage. I lost the house we'd lived in for 28 years. 28 years of memories, gone to the bank. I ended up in a small, run-down apartment on the east side of town. The kind of place where the heat barely works, and the neighbors are either too young to care about anyone else or too old to do anything about the noise. I had maybe $300 to my name, driving a 1998 Honda Civic that Sarah used to call Reliable Old Betsy. The paint was faded, there was a crack in the windshield, and the air conditioning had given up years ago. But she still ran. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I was at the grocery store, trying to stretch $20 into a week's worth of food. I had a small cart with the basics: bread, peanut butter, some canned soup, a bag of rice. I was wearing my cleanest shirt, which wasn't saying much, and my only pair of jeans that didn't have holes. My shoes were old work boots that had seen better days, but they were comfortable and still had some life left in them. I was in the checkout line behind this young couple. They couldn't have been more than 25, both of them dressed in expensive clothes, the woman carrying a designer purse that probably cost more than my rent. They had a cart full of organicness and gluten-free that, premium steaks, imported wine, the kind of shopping trip I used to do with Sarah when times were good. The cashier, a young girl with purple hair and multiple piercings, was all smiles for them. "Did you find everything okay? Would you like help out to your car?" The whole 9 yards. They paid with a black credit card. You know, the kind that shows you've got serious money. As they walked away, I heard the woman say to her boyfriend, "I can't believe they let people like that even shop here." And she gestured back toward me. I pretended not to hear it, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. People like that. People like me. Old, black, poor, invisible. When I got to the cashier, her whole demeanor changed. No smile, no eye contact, just scanning my items like they were contaminated. "Paper or plastic?" she asked in a flat voice, looking past me like I wasn't even there. When I handed her my $20 bill, which was crumpled because I'd been holding it tight in my pocket, she held it up to the light like she was checking if it was real. "Exact change would be better next time," she said when she handed me my receipt. "It makes everything go faster." I wanted to tell her that this was exact change for me, that this 20 represented cutting my meals in half a week, but I just nodded and took my single bag of groceries. Walking out of that store, I felt smaller than I had in years. The automatic doors seemed to close behind me with finality that said I wasn't welcome back. I sat in old Betsy for 10 minutes before I could even start the engine, just trying to process what had happened. It wasn't the worst thing anyone had ever done to me, but it was the way it happened, the casual cruelty of it, that broke something inside me. Driving home, I started thinking about my father. He'd worked 2 jobs his whole life, never missed a day, never complained, always told me that if you work hard and treat people right, life will treat you right back. He died believing that, and sitting in that parking lot, I wondered if he'd been wrong all along or if the world had just changed too much. The next few weeks were more of the same. Job applications that went nowhere. Interviews where I could see in their eyes that I was too old, too tired, too much of a risk. I applied for everything: grocery stores, gas stations, fast food places. Most didn't even bother to call me back. The ones that did made it clear they were just going through the motions. I started avoiding places where I might run into people I used to know. The shame was eating me alive. These were people who remembered when I had a good job, a nice house, when Sarah and I would host barbecues every summer, and everyone would come. Now I was just another old man that the world had forgotten about. One Thursday, I was at the social services office trying to get help with my utility bill. The waiting room was full of people like me. Tired faces, worn clothes, that look of defeat that comes from having to ask for help when you've been independent your whole life. When my number was finally called, the woman behind the desk couldn't have been more than 30. She looked at my application like I was trying to pull a scam. "Mr. Washington," she said, not looking up from her computer screen. "It says here you own a home until 2 years ago. What happened to the equity from that sale?" I explained about Sarah's medical bills, about the mortgage being underwater, about how there was no equity left after the bank took it. She made a note, her expression suggesting she'd heard that story before and didn't believe it. "And you're saying you can't find work anywhere?" she continued, still typing. "At your age, have you considered that maybe it's time to adjust your expectations? There are programs for seniors, activities at the community center." I felt my face burn. Activities at the community center. Like I was ready to be put out to pasture. "Ma'am, I'm not looking for activities. I'm looking for work. I can still work." She finally looked up at me, and I saw it again, that look that said I was already dead and just didn't know it yet. "Mr. Washington, I understand this is difficult, but the reality is that at 62, with your skill set, your options are limited. The best I can do is get you on the emergency assistance program for 3 months. After that, you'll need to reapply." She handed me a form. Next. Walking out of that building, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just sadness or frustration, but anger. Real, burning anger. I was tired being treated like I was invisible, like my 40-plus years of working and paying taxes and being a decent citizen meant nothing. I was tired of apologizing for existing. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather, who'd built houses with his bare hands well into his 70s. About my father, who'd worked at the steel mill until the day he died. About Sarah, who never let anyone make her feel small. What would they think of me now, letting the world push me around like this? The next morning, I decided I was done being invisible. I put on my best shirt, the one I'd been saving for interviews, and drove to the fanciest restaurant in town. Chez Laurent, the kind of place Sarah and I had always said we'd go to for our anniversary someday, but never did. I walked in and asked to speak to the manager. The hostess, a young woman in all black, looked me up and down like I'd wandered in from the street, which I guess I had. "Sir, do you have a reservation?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "No, but I'd like to speak to the manager about employment opportunities." She disappeared into the back, and I could hear whispering and what sounded like laughter. The manager came out, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never done a day of physical labor in his life. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're not hiring at the moment. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the chain restaurants near the highway." More comfortable. Code for you don't belong here. But instead of leaving like I normally would have, I stood my ground. "Actually, I'd like to apply anyway. I have 40 years of customer service experience, and I believe I could be an asset to your team." The hostess snickered behind her hand. The manager's smile became strained. "Sir, I appreciate your interest, but our clientele expects a certain atmosphere. I'm sure you understand." I understood perfectly. I was too old, too black, too poor for their atmosphere. But for the first time in years, instead of shrinking away, I felt myself getting taller. "What I understand," I said, loud enough for the other people in the restaurant to hear, "is that you're judging me based on what I look like instead of what I can do. That's called discrimination, and it's illegal." The manager's face went red, and several customers were staring now. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." He was trying to keep his voice down, but I could see the panic in his eyes. "Security." But I was already walking toward the door. As I passed the tables full of well-dressed people eating their expensive lunches, I said loud enough for everyone to hear, 40 years of paying taxes, 40 years of working hard, and this is how we treat people in America. I walked out with my head held high for the first time in months. I'd made a scene and I didn't care. Let them remember the old black man who wouldn't disappear quietly. Over the next few days, something had shifted in me. I stopped apologizing for existing. When the clerk at the bank acted like I was wasting her time, I asked to speak to her supervisor. When the pharmacist treated me like I couldn't afford my medication, I reminded him that my money spent the same as everyone else's. Small act of defiance, but they added up to something bigger. 2 weeks later, I was at the diner where I sometimes treated myself to coffee when I had an extra $1. I was sitting at the counter, reading the newspaper and minding my own business, when 3 men in construction gear came in. They were loud, talking about some job they were working on, complaining about how hard it was to find good help these days. "Nobody wants to work anymore," one of them was saying. "All these young guys, they work for 2 days and then they're gone. No work ethic." I kept reading my paper, but I was listening. The man who seemed to be in charge, a burly white guy with paint-stained clothes, was shaking his head. I swear, if I could find just one guy who showed up every day and did what he was supposed to do, I'd hire him tomorrow. I folded my paper and turned around. "Excuse me," I said. I couldn't help overhearing. "You looking for workers?" The 3 of them looked at me like I'd grown a second head. "I'm serious," I continued. "I've been looking for work, and it sounds like you need help. The boss," his name was Mike, I learned later, looked me up and down. I could see him calculating, try to figure out if I was serious or just some old man who didn't know what he was getting into. "No offense, Pops, but this is construction work. Hard physical labor. You sure you're up for that?" "I worked 35 years at the auto plant," I told him. "I know hard work, and I know how to show up every day." One of the other guys nudged Mike and whispered something I couldn't hear, but Mike shook his head. "Tell you what," he said, "I've got a job starting Monday. If you can handle 1 week, we'll talk about keeping you on. But I'm warning you, it's not easy work." I shook his hand. "Sir, at my age, nothing's easy. But I'll be there." He gave me the address and told me to show up at 7 a.m. sharp. As I walked out of that diner, I felt something I hadn't felt in 2 years. Hope. Monday morning, I was there at 6:30. The job was renovating an old office building downtown, and Mike wasn't kidding about it being hard work. Tearing out old drywall, hauling debris, cleaning up after the skilled tradesmen. My back was screaming by lunch, and my hands were torn up despite the work gloves. But I didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks, didn't give them any reason to regret taking a chance on me. The other workers, all of them 20 or 30 years younger than me, started out skeptical. I heard the whispers, saw the looks, but as the days went on, something changed. When they saw that I was there every morning before anyone else, that I stayed until the job was done, that I wasn't afraid to get dirty or do the jobs nobody else wanted, they started treating me different. By the end of the week, Mike pulled me aside. "You know, Marcus, I wasn't sure about you at first, but you work harder than guys half your age. You want to stay on?" I wanted to hug the man, but I just nodded and said, "Yes, sir, I'd like that very much." The pay wasn't great, but it was honest work, and for the first time in 2 years, I had money coming in regularly. More than that, I had purpose again. I wasn't just some old man taking up space. I was contributing, earning my keep, proving that I still had value. 3 months into the job, we were working on a high-end office renovation downtown. The building's management company had hired us to completely redo the executive floors, new everything, spare no expense. It was a kind of job that could set Mike's company up for years if we did it right. The project manager for the management company was a young woman named Jessica. She was probably in her 30s, always dressed like she stepped out of Business magazine. The kind of person who talked about synergy and leveraging opportunities. The first time she came to check on our progress, I was cleaning up debris in what would become the main conference room. She walked right past me like I was part of the furniture, went straight to Mike. "I need to discuss some concerns about your crew," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Our client are going to be walking through here, and we need to maintain a certain professional image." She glanced in my direction. "Maybe some of your workers could, work in areas where clients won't see them?" I felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but this time it was mixed with something else. Anger, yes, but also a strange kind of clarity. I'd been here before, been made to feel invisible and unwanted. But this time, I wasn't to just take it. Mike, to his credit, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, all my workers are professionals. Marcus, they've been one of my most reliable guys." But Jessica wasn't backing down. "I'm sure he's a hard worker, but you have to understand our position. Image matters in this business." That's when something inside me snapped. Not in a bad way, but in a liberating way. I put down my broom, walked over to where they were standing, and extended my hand to Jessica. "Ma'am, I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Marcus Washington." She looked at my outstretched hand like it might bite her, but she shook it briefly. "Jessica Parker, project manager." Her tone was cold, professional, dismissive. "Ms. Parker," I said, "I've been watching this renovation, and I've noticed some issues with the electrical planning that might cause problems down the line. Would you like me to explain, or would you prefer I discuss it with someone else?" The question caught her off guard, and I could see her trying to figure out what I was up to. "I'm sorry, what?" she said. Mike was looking at me strangely, too. He knew I'd worked at the auto plant, but we'd never really talked about what I'd done there. "The electrical planning," I continued. "The way they've got the outlets positioned in the conference rooms, it's not going to work with modern presentation equipment. You're going to have extension cords running everywhere, which is both a safety hazard and looks unprofessional." Jessica's expression changed from dismissive to uncertain. "How do you know about electrical planning?" she asked. "Ma'am, I spent 20 years as a maintenance supervisor at the auto plant. Part of my job was overseeing facility upgrades and renovations. I know a thing or two about making buildings work efficiently." I walked over to the plans that were spread out on a makeshift table made from sawhorses and plywood. "Look here," I said, pointing to the outlet placements. "You've got them positioned for the old standard of having one presentation screen at the front of the room. But modern conference rooms need multiple screens, video conferencing equipment, charging stations for tablets and phones. The way it's laid out now, you'll be retrofitting in 6 months." Jessica came over and looked at the plans. I could see her mind working, trying to process what I was telling her. "What would you suggest?" she asked, her tone now more professional than dismissive. I spent the next 10 minutes walking her through alternative electrical layouts, explaining how small changes now could save thousands of dollars and major headaches later. When I finished, Jessica was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "These are good points. Very good points. Can you put this in writing?" I nodded. "I'll have something for you tomorrow." As she walked away, I heard her on her phone. We need to postpone the electrical installation. I'll explain when you get here. Mike was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Marcus, why didn't you tell me you knew about this stuff? I shrugged. You hired me to do construction work, not to be an engineer. But when I see problems, I speak up. The next day, I handed Jessica a 3-page report detailing not just the electrical issues, but several other potential problems I'd noticed in the renovation plans. Structural modifications that wouldn't meet current building codes, HVAC placement that would create noise problems, flooring choices that wouldn't hold up to heavy commercial use. 2 days later, Jessica called Mike and asked if I could attend the next project meeting, not as a laborer, but as a consultant. I put on my interview shirt and sat at that conference table with the architects, the electrical contractors, the project managers. For 2 hours, we went through every aspect of the renovation, and I found myself answering questions, suggesting alternatives, solving problems that no one else had thought of. When the meeting was over, Jessica walked me to the elevator. Marcus, she said, I owe you an apology. I made assumptions about you based on... She paused, struggling for the right words. Based on things that don't matter. You probably just saved this project from some very expensive mistakes. Ms. Parker, I said, I've been judged by my appearance my whole life. I'm used to it, but I've learned that the best response is just to do good work and let that speak for itself. The elevator arrived, and as I stepped in, she said, we should talk about bringing you on as a permanent consultant. If you're interested. If I was interested, I rode the elevator down to the ground floor with a smile I couldn't wipe off my face. 62 years old, and life was just getting started. That was 6 months ago. Today, I'm not just a construction worker anymore. I'm the facilities consultant for 3 different renovation projects. I've got business cards with my name on them, and people actually listen when I talk. The money's better than anything I made at the auto plant. And more importantly, I wake up every morning knowing that what I do matters. Last week, I was back at that same grocery store where this all started. Same cashier with the purple hair, same attitude. But this time, when I walked up to pay for my groceries, including some of those premium items I'd been admiring from afar, she looked at me differently. Maybe it was a confident way I carried myself. Maybe it was the new clothes, or maybe word had gotten around about what I was doing now. She was polite, professional, even smiled. As I was leaving, I heard someone behind me say, "Isn't it the guy who's been fixing all those buildings downtown?" I didn't turn around, but I walked a little taller. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just refusing to become invisible, refusing to accept other people's limitations, and proving that your worth isn't determined by your age, your bank account, or the color of your skin. I think about my father a lot these days, and I think he was right after all. If you work hard and treat people right, life will treat you right back. It just might take longer than you expect, and it might not come the way you imagined, but it'll come. You just have to be ready for it when it does, and never, ever let anyone convince you that your best days are behind you. They're not. Trust me on that one.